NPCC, Gavin is responsible for ensuring strong coordination and collaboration across UK policing, including British overseas territories and Crown dependencies. As everyone is probably aware, policing practices across the UK are held together by strong principles and values which are rooted in policing by consent. Working together with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, the College of Policing, Her Majesty's Inspectorate and the National Crime Agency, and many other public and voluntary bodies, Gavin ensures the NPC contributes to a shared vision of achieving the most trusted and engaging police service in the world by making communities safer and stronger, which obviously we all think is crucial. Gavin is the Senior Responsible Officer for the National Police Race Action Plan. He is Director of Blue Light Commercial and Police Digital Services, and he chairs the boards of the Criminal Records Office. He is a patron of the Police Mutual Assurance Society. In his former role as Chief Constable of Surrey, Gavin was Chair of the NPCC Finance Coordination Committee and the NPC Communications Advisory Group. Prior to that, he was the NPCC lead for neighbourhood policing and chaired the committee to produce the College of Policing guidelines on modernising neighbourhood policing. If I have to say NPCC again, okay? There's a lot of NPCCs in there. Born and bred in Hartlepool on the North East Coast, Gavin studied engineering and management studies at the University of Cambridge and worked for GEC Marconi Research as a sponsored student. Upon graduation, he joined Cambridge Constabulary, then transferred to Surrey Police in 1996. He worked across a wide variety of roles, including head of serious and organised crime, professional standards, and often returned to his passion of neighbourhood policing, which is a good opening for your presentation today, Policing in a Polarised World. Welcome.
Thank you. Hey, you know, thanks ever so much for turning out on a very sunny Friday bank holiday evening and delaying your visit down to the pub. I'm really grateful for you doing that. I'm sure there's plenty of fine places out there you could be at the moment, so I'm grateful for the dedication that you've shown. It's a real pleasure to be back in Liverpool, a place that always makes you feel welcome, just like my hometown, a slightly smaller port on the northeast coast, but equally vibrant with life. Hartlepool. So just in case you were wanting to get your orientation there, it took me a while to find that map on the internet. Both the places of real historic importance in times of conflict, international trade, industrial growth and decline, and both the places I think that are made by and of their people. Proud, warm, hard-working, resilient. Perhaps the greatest divide that you might identify between Hartlepool and Liverpool is the quality of the football. But regardless of the scale, the supporters would recognise, I think, common traits in each other. Passion, commitment, a sense of pride and belonging, a feeling of togetherness that comes from a common cause. I think that these are places that make us, and I was made in Hartlepool. That community upbringing, and I deliberately call it that, a community upbringing, broader than a family upbringing, has really shaped my thoughts about policing. And it's with thanks to my schoolmate, Andy, not this one here, different Andy, that I found a route into policing. Andy left Hartlepool to come here, to Liverpool, to study. Now, don't judge, but he didn't like it. Not Liverpool, that is, but the course he'd chosen, civil engineering. So he left the course early and joined the police. And for 2 years, he shared his stories with me, and I was absolutely hooked. Just as an aside, I've got Andy's youngest son lodging with me at the moment whilst he does his legal studies in London before taking up a pupillage at Chambers in Leeds. So these are community connections that can last a lifetime and can span generations and geography. And very early on in my policing experience, I realised that there are so many people that don't get the benefit of that community upbringing that I had. That there were people who didn't feel safe in their own communities, or they didn't have a place that they could call home. I'll always remember my first call to a domestic assault. It was a graphic scene, the sort of scene that stays with you, and I was shocked. Imagine not feeling safe in your own home, let alone your own community. And what carries you through these challenges, those early shocks in service, is the teamwork, the sense of purpose, the leaders that remind you that you can make a difference to communities and their safety. And I'm so pleased that I worked with people that got me off to a good start and set me up to feel today that if I could turn the clock back and do it all again and join now, then I would, in a heartbeat. In my time as Chief Constable in Surrey, I always enjoyed welcoming new recruits into the service, brimming with enthusiasm and challenging questions. And as part of my welcome, I'd asked them to do a short thought experiment with me, which you can join in now. You've had a long week, it's Friday, this is a relaxing thing. All you have to do is close your eyes, take a long deep breath, and think of a place where you've loved to live. And I use that word intentionally, love, because it carries emotion with it. Remember the sounds and the smells and the emotions associated with that place. Just take a moment and have a think. So I can see quite a bit of quiet contemplation going on in the room, but I do want to wake you up before you have a snooze on a Friday evening. Now, the new recruits are really talkative, and I know you're going to be the same. So who wants to share with me an image that you had in your head? See if you can channel that inner energy that a brand new recruit into policing does, where they can't stop themselves talking. They want to tell you about it. I can stand here for a while. Andy. Anfield. Tell me what's in your head and in your heart about Anfield, then, Andy.
It's just all about memories.
Yeah.
Previously, family around me.
Yeah.
Celebration, success.
Sorry,
success.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing.
Family, celebration, success. Yeah, Bernard.
Sunday morning after my first alcoholic policy at university.
Yeah.
Apart from the feeling of, do I get myself to the hospital, it was of camaraderie, of meeting new people, of challenging and enjoyable conversation that previous evening.
Yeah.
Coupled with a mental note made not to drink so much bad red wine next time.
Yeah. Oh, so people around you, people who you feel safe with, you've had a shared experience with, for better or worse, but a sense that you feel some belonging there. I'll take one more. Yeah, hiya.
Place called Bedrock in North Wales.
Yeah, tell me about St Bedrock in North Wales then.
There's headland there.
Yeah.
Beautiful view over Cardigan Bay.
Yeah.
You can see Stoughton. On a good summer's day, you can see dolphins in the bay.
Wow, okay.
There's nobody around. It's where my family are from.
Yeah.
It's relaxing, it's peaceful.
Yeah.
And there's no crime.
No crime. And I bet you like...
Not because you're here.
Yeah.
There's no crime
There's no crime there. And I bet you like going back there, do you?
Yes.
Yeah. Does it feel like a bit of a pilgrimage going?
I've got a house down there.
You got a house. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing the stories. And I deliberately start with that exercise with new recruits, with those positive emotions and feelings, because so often we're trying to solve problems and we're starting from a sort of negative mindset. But starting positively, I think, makes a real difference. And I've found that every time I've done that little thought experiment, it leads to discussion just like we've had there, about safety and freedom, about friendships and community. And then in turn, I'll take the conversation. So what can we do in policing to help nurture places where people love to live? And that simple idea, taken from my upbringing right on the beach on the northeast coast. I literally lived over the road from the beach, could walk out the front door, cross by the Nortons, which I always thought were bollards in the middle of the road. I got to age 11 when I realised it was the name of the hotel on the corner. I always thought they were called Nortons. That sort of simple idea has really carried me through my career and has been a bit of a touchstone for me. And it's given me a sense of purpose. That's to do all I can through policing to create communities that are safe, but also feel safe as well. And I've also learned in meeting this challenge that you have to adapt to keep pace and find new ways to tackle the threats that undermine safety and feelings of safety. And this concept was also at the heart of the very first research project I ever did with colleagues in academia from the University of Surrey, when I discovered that there was an evidence base to this way of thinking. If you like, a formula that could lead to places where people love to live. And it developed into something called the National Reassurance Policing Programme, the evaluation of which I think remains a good read today. And there are colleagues in this room with us here this evening that also contributed to that research and that practice. Reassurance policing began with a paper written by Jane Harwood, a police staff colleague in Surrey, who was a great driver for change. And it was called Civility First. Based on the broken windows ideas of Wilson and Kelling in the US, the proposal aimed to tackle the reassurance gap. That is, why was it we had places where crime levels could be low, but fear of crime remained high? And the big idea at the centre of the theory for change was signal crimes. Martin Innes, now Professor Innes, was working at the University of Surrey on an idea about crime as communication. Why is it that some crimes and disorders send a signal to communities that all is not well, gaining prominence and attention, and other crimes pass unnoticed? And of course, we can see this today, and we can all think of crimes, some in too stark a proximity, that tragically have national and international impact. But Martin wanted to understand what was happening. Why was it that it made a signal so strong or travel so far? And we asked Martin if he could apply this perspective to everyday crime and disorder problems to help us close that reassurance gap. The idea being that if we could identify those crimes that mattered most to people and deal with them effectively, then we could close the gap between safety and feelings of safety. So one of my first tasks in this as a keen and eager neighbourhood policing inspector was to write the business case to secure the funding from the Police Standards Unit at the Home Office. The problem was that there were some competing ideas at the time, and they were all chasing the money. We had Sir David Phillips, Chief Across the Border, who developed the Kent policing model, which became the National Intelligence Model. Matt Baggett in Leicestershire was working on priority places or neighbourhood management. Having sat in a meeting at New Scotland Yard, listening to all of the big thinkers in policing at the time debate the merits of each of these, I had my first moment of not being an observer. And I piped up from the end of a long meeting table to suggest that I write a paper that brings the ideas together into one proposal. And it was like I'd walked into a bar that was just for locals. There was an awkward silence when people looked down the table and thought, who's this fella? Thankfully, Sir Dennis O'Connor, my chief in Surrey at the time, came to my rescue. And I spent the next few days hiding away in a local station, speaking to the staff officers and project leads at the various big hitters to find out what language, specifically what language, and that's important, might be agreeable to all of them. Language that could build consensus and not division. And miraculously, it worked, all corralled around the idea for this national programme. We secured for the funding, for the research, for the evaluation, and to oil the cogs of operational activity. 8 forces and 16 trial sites later, including some here in Merseyside and across the border in Lancashire, we had a proven signal crimes perspective, the beginning of a national neighbourhood policing programme, a legacy commitment from the then Prime Minister Tony Blair to have neighbourhood policing in every borough and district, an investment of 16,000 police community support officers. Ideas that were scrolled on flip charts and the very best cutting-edge technology at the time, the printable whiteboard, developed through practice and through testing into national guidance, variations of which still exist today. practiced not just in the UK, but that spread across the world. And if you want to hear more about what lay behind the signal crimes perspective, perhaps we can come to that in the questions, and that's a hint, or as we would say, a reasonable line of inquiry. As part of the research for Reassurance Policing, we made a film about signal crimes, which was put together by the BAFTA award-winning documentary maker Roger Graff. In 1982, Roger had made the documentary, which was simply called Police, which exposed the police's shocking attitudes towards investigating rape. That one led to major reform and investigations. And in our signal crimes film as well, there was some equally valuable insights. There was a piece to camera by a neighbourhood officer in Blackpool, and he said something like, "I honestly believed that the public's priorities were the same as our priorities, and now I know they're not." And in that simple statement, the central challenge of gaining community confidence had been unlocked. Do our communities believe that we really understand the problems that matter most to them? Do they think we're doing something about them to solve them? And what that also naturally leads to is the sort of conversations that we were having earlier, an approach about what's good about an area that can be built on. Questions like, what do we love about living here? It became crystal clear through the emerging evidence that if communities believe that we do understand those issues and that we act upon them collectively with them, then confidence in policing follows. We could strengthen the share price on which we trade to enable policing across a much broader mission in keeping people safe and feeling safe. But, and it is a big but, we now live in a very different world to that we were operating in the early 2000s. With over 50% of crime being committed online, with over 80% of crime having a digital footprint, with illegal commodities being traded on social media channels, with bots generating content that drives a wedge between communities that had previously been cohesive, with concerns over police standards, and influential leaders taking populist or polarised positions. So how much of that research remains valid? So that was a very long intro to the title of tonight's lecture. So in this time when public confidence can be shaped not only by the quality of local service, but by the tone of international online commentary, how should the police service respond? What are the historic principles and values that will help maintain confidence and promote safety in today's world? And what implications might there be for police reform? It's my belief that public confidence in us and our legitimacy police is not only shaped now by our understanding and engagement in solving local crime and disorder problems, but by our conduct, taken more broadly, our culture, and by commentary about our judgment, decision-making, and application of discretion. In other words, are we a police service that is there for everyone, or are we only here for some? Are we a police service that's prone to support some causes and not others, or are we truly impartial? Is there any truth to the criticism of two-tier policing? So to think about this set of problems, I'd like to go back a lot further than the 20 years of reassurance policing, back to first principles. Those set out by the first joint commissioners of what was then termed the new police, the Metropolitan Police in 1829. So often referred to as the Pelian principles, but all the evidence set out by Tony Moore in his wonderful biography of them indicates clearly that it was the work of Charles Rowan and Richard Mayne in setting out general instructions to new constables in their role as the first joint commissioners in the metropolis. Imagine that, a job share in 1829. I think Mark might value a job share now actually for a bit of a break. And it's the summary of their instructions, instructional material by historian Charles Reith in 1956 that's now commonly referred to as the Pelian Principles. But it's Moore's biography that I credit with the very helpful references that follow, and if you've not dived into it, it's well worth a read. And in looking at these foundational principles and values, I believe it's the detail of the language that's important, and we will look at it, and I'll bring some of it up on screen, as it gives you an indication of leadership intent, what was in their mind at the time. So let's look at the detail of the second principle, the first, of course, being that the primary duty of police is to prevent crime. So Rowan and Main approached it like this. It was noted that the commissioners have highlighted gratification in finding that no unnecessary use of was made by the police of their truncheons when called out, and that it is not appeased that in a single instance was unnecessary degree of violence used. The commissioners trust that by such form and temperate behaviour, the police have conciliated the populace and obtained the goodwill of all respectable persons. David Askeley, in his 1979 book, The Queen's Peace, commented that it was perhaps Rowan, who was the older of the two at the time, who appreciated that the future of the new police depended entirely on public acceptance, and that the constable and their conduct were the yardstick by which the whole new policing project would be judged. Jump ahead to Reith's summary. So this is 1829, 1956. We have the more familiar: to recognise always that the power of the police to fulfil their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions, behaviour, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. So you can see that it's a construct not just about physical restraint, but one about actions and behaviour, on which, of course, societal expectations change over time. So it's by no means static. And, of course, we get it wrong, especially when it comes to marginalised and minority communities. So there are three debates running at the moment. You could take the sex and gender debate, the debate about, well, going back to when I started in my service, the enforcement of laws against the LGBT community, which of course we will look back now and say that those laws were wholly inappropriate, and we're still rebuilding relationships now. Or it was mentioned in the introduction that I lead the efforts on the Police Race Action Plan. How do we right historic wrongs? Whereas recently, as the 1950s, the police were actively spying on black communities to undermine the character of them and their place in society. So these are things that have got to be wrestled with and always need checks and balances from the communities that we serve. So let's have a look at the third principle to see if that assists us any further. So from Rowan and Main, remember, there was no qualification more indispensable to a police officer than a perfect command of temper. And they should not allow themselves to be moved by the slightest degree by any language or threats that may be used. Performing duties in a quiet and determined manner was more likely to induce well-disposed bystanders to assist them should they require it. And as summarised by Reith, again, perhaps more familiar, to recognise always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means also securing the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of the laws. It's here that I find the more precise language of Rowan and Main more helpful to these current day challenges. Not to be moved by the slightest degree by language or threats, performing duties in a quiet and determined manner. Also note that Rowan and Main are clear in both of these principles that they're not trying to please everybody. Notice they mention the goodwill of all respectable persons and assistance from well-disposed bystanders. They understood back then that there would always be people at the fringes, at the poles of the debate, not well-disposed to support policing, all respectable in their own behaviour. So let's stop here for a moment and apply this to a current crime and disorder problem, the problem of populism. We've seen policing being drawn into populist debates, most notably with the accusation of two-tier policing, and perhaps before that on activism and impartiality. This first gained prominence arising from the policing of the protests which followed the terrorist attacks on Israel, and then again following the widespread public disorder that followed the horrific murders in Southport. We saw senior figures make claim that policing discretion was not exercised fairly or legitimately. And since then, we've had a former Home Secretary calling for the release of someone convicted for inciting racial hatred online. Of course, we've the benefit now of being able to look back at independent reports from Sir Andy and the Inspectorate, on activism and partiality, and from the Home Affairs Select Committee report on the disorder, who've respectively set aside with supporting evidence such accusations. This is helpful, but both required policing to take long, deep breaths and not react instinctively to defend its position. That temperate behaviour that Rowan and Mayne were talking about. However, in leading in the midst of response to such events, I do believe that the thoughts of Rowan and Mayne are valid and helpful to us still, not to be moved by the language, to exercise temperate behaviour, and in doing so, we'll earn the support of respectable people and well-disposed bystanders. And I've still got incredible faith in well-disposed bystanders. Some private polling that we did during the disorder showed us a typical bell curve response. That a small percentage thought we were too heavy-handed, a small percentage thought we were too lenient, but most that we could have done just a little bit more or a little bit less. Let's move on then. Have a look at the fourth principle, which in some ways is more straightforward and again addresses physical restraint, but it's also central to the principle of policing by consent. Those in policing will be quite familiar with Reith's description. To recognise always that the extent to which the cooperation of the public can be secured diminishes proportionately with the necessary use of physical force and the compulsion for achieving police objectives. As we've seen now, Rowan and Mayne are more precise in their language. The constables are to recollect upon all occasions that they're required to execute their duty with good temper and discretion. Any instance of unnecessary violence by them in striking a party in their charge will be severely punished. A constable must not use his staff because the party in custody is violent in behaviour or language. In his briefing to officers prior to the deployment of the Coldfield riots, Rowan personally warned the officers to be temperate, to keep their temper and not to use more force than was necessary, and to take into custody those who were addressing the mob and those who carried banners and then dispersed the remainder. So here we see a very practical application of discretion that still exists in public order policing today. And of course, we've now the added benefit of technology that allows us to identify people and take them into custody under safer and more controlled circumstances after the event. In the fifth principle, Rowan and Mayne are remarkably brief. To be civil and attentive to all persons of every rank and class, and warn that insolence and incivility will not be tolerated. A straightforward civility first message, just like Jane Harwood's paper 20 years ago. Reith's interpretation is a considerable expansion on this. And this, I think, will be familiar to many of us. Seeking and preserving public favour, not pandering to public opinion, demonstrating impartiality to the law, complete independence of policy, without regard to the justice or injustice and substance of individual laws, ready offering of individual sacrifice and friendships to the member of public, without regard to their wealth, social standing, ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humour, and ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. Now, I have to say, with my passion for neighbourhood policing, this is one of my favourites. As Reith is describing what civility from policing looks like in practice. In my view, courtesy and friendly good humour can get you a long way. Or as I used to say to new recruits, learn to talk to strangers on buses. And they used to look at me as if I was lost the plot, but give it a go. It's good fun. In the sixth principle, Rowan and Mayne are addressing discretion and decisiveness. To be particularly cautious, not to interfere idly and unnecessarily, but when required to act, they should do so with decision and boldness. Here, Reith is a bit narrower, I think. Back again to physical discretion. Using only physical force when the exercise of persuasion, advice and warning is found to be insufficient. Using only the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary to achieve objectives. As an aside, I found this very helpful during the pandemic. If you recall the time when legislation was framed within days to prevent us from leaving our own homes, it was really quite unprecedented times and unprecedented restrictions on our freedom. And I recall vividly the National Conference Call with Chiefs, chaired by my predecessor, where we were discussing what would our approach be to this new legislation. And during that call, I sent an email to some trusted colleagues describing the 4 E's. Engage, explain. We all needed the legislation explaining to us. Encourage and enforce. And those 4 E's took hold in communication terms, but also in practical policing terms, and gave politicians a framework on which to give a sort of balanced view. And I think during the pandemic, political leaders gained an insight into what policing has known for decades, that it's really hard work getting people to do things by consent. You need trust, and you need to have earned it. So let's stop here for a moment again and apply these lessons in history to another current day problem, the post-truth world. The assertion of lies, of facts, the generation of false narratives through misinformation and disinformation. How should policing even begin to respond to such challenges? Is it even a challenge that can be achieved, or are we now at a stage when such behaviour is becoming commonplace and the generation of deep fakes, false narratives and harmful content is out of control? I think not. These are problems that have been engineered into our society and to our technologies and can be engineered out, either socially or technically, and policing does have a role to play. However, we must exercise some degree of caution to what our role is again. I think the precision of the language of Rowan and Main is helpful. Rowan's warning about not to interfere idly, but when it is necessary to do so, and when to do so with boldness. This is a useful lesson around the policing of laws that may concern freedom of speech. Some tolerance is required, but when a line is crossed, for example, inciting racial hatred or violence, then strong action must be taken. Now, the line will change according to legal judgments and new legislation, but policing must be careful not to lower its guard. We must be vigilant to temperature changes and think about the civility first that we're charged with protecting. We must not take our lead from those in positions of power who have lost sight of these values. We must be leaders in our civil duties. I also think that the advice on taking out the ringleaders can apply to those perpetrating such crime and violence online. In the same way it does to be a mob on the street, as we're seeing in online harms, there must also be consequences for those that fail to make their platforms safe for children or turn a blind eye to criminality. We also need the assistance of many new technologies to help us in taking command and investigation decisions on when, where and how to intervene, and when to exercise discretion and maintain an even temper in the knowledge that the well-disposed bystander is not swayed. We're working on tools that will help us with just that, with deepfake detection, to help us on the identification of disinformation, help us understand if it's having any real-world impact, and when or if an intervention is required, what that response might be, and the specific language that is most effective in correcting a false narrative. Policing is not the only sector that needs to develop these tools and capabilities, and this is where partnerships, such as with universities like this, can be so beneficial. All of these are fascinating new research areas. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to cover the detail of any of the remaining principles, 7, 8 and 9. The 7th, we now know as the public are the police and the police are the public, but as far as we know, Peel never said those words, and nor did Rowan or Main. It most likely originates from the 1361 Justice of the Peace Act. 8 concerns the separation of policing and judicial functions, also important, and 9, the evaluation criteria for policing around the absence of crime and disorder. Interestingly, on 9, it's thought that it might originate from Rowan's military training under St John Moore, different spelling, no relation, who noted the following. It is by the infrequency of crime in your regiment, and not by the punishments that will appear in your regiment books, that a general officer will judge of its state of discipline and of your capacity and conduct as a commanding officer. And of course, that also requires integrity, not to fiddle the figures. You may have noticed that I've framed the current day problems using the work of Moises Naim from his book, The Revenge of Power, charting the emergence of autocratic regimes, which give us the framework of populism, post-truth and polarisation. And I've set out that I do believe that there are some antidotes written in our history that help with post-truth and populism. And for the last challenge of polarisation, I want to return to where I started. In dealing with division, with rising community tensions, with intolerance, I don't believe that there's any substitute for the quality of human contact that policing can provide. There is a phrase that policing is for everybody or it becomes for no one. And the way to demonstrate that is to signal that we care deeply about the problems faced by local communities. In the days of Reassurance policing, I remember Matt Baggett, then Chief Constable of Leicestershire, talking about neighbourhood police officers as social entrepreneurs. By exercising control over criminality and disorder at the local level, we can be a catalyst for broader social change and for communities, when they feel safe to do so, to come together. We even produced a booklet for local beast officers called In Control. It seems to me that the obvious antidote to polarisation is to come together. And policing can definitely play a role in creating safe spaces where people can do so. Coming together is something that we must also do across policing in the United Kingdom if we're to have strength in our response to these current day challenges that we've skated across the surface this evening. This is one of the key drivers in why I've been such a strong advocate of the need for bold and ambitious police reform, built upon a strong neighbourhood policing foundation. Our current model, designed, as we've heard, on very strong values and principles and really helpful language that can still guide us today, has its organisational roots in a post-Second World War commission. Our structures and practices are influenced to this day by a Royal Commission that sat between 1960 and 1962, before even the pocket calculator, let alone the internet. Over recent months, leaders in National Police Chiefs Council, in our college, Counter-Terrorism, National Crime Agency and Inspectorate have united around the need for reform. It's long overdue so we can keep pace with rapidly changing criminal and safety threats, address the imbalances in funding and the lack of financial resilience that's developed following the years of austerity, to correct a governance model that is slow and complicated and that does not encourage consistent or always collaborative approaches to developing the new capabilities that I've spoken about this evening. Together, we've called for 5 pillars of reform: the strengthening of local partnerships to prevent crime and common standards and expectations on neighbourhood policing. Secondly, the tiering of capabilities at the right places, nationally, regionally and locally, and addressing the question of whether 2 or 3 tiers are needed, just as has been done in many other jurisdictions around the world. To reset the governance, to make it clear who gets to decide on what, and not to let operational independence stand in the way of collective progress, being much clearer on performance expectations. A redesign of how the money flows, alongside the capabilities, as negotiating over every national development required to deal with the threats I've talked about allows the criminals to get ahead. And a much stronger national centre that provides strategic, enabling and operational functions with the powers to ensure consistency where consistency is needed. So with this bold and ambitious reform, built on the really strong values that I've talked about, we can make sure that we are adapting in a way that can stay true to those historic values, but also in a way that means wherever you live in the United Kingdom, in Liverpool or in Hartlepool, you know that you can rely on good quality local policing that has the access to the same capabilities to keep your family safe and your community safe in the threats from today's globally connected world. So to finish, I'd just like to return to where I started with that short thought experiment about police and love. And yes, you heard me correctly. Not John and Yoko, peace and love, police and love. Two words that perhaps you've rarely heard side by side, but for me, are very natural. I hope you've gained an impression this evening that I love policing. And I think the people who police bring a great deal of love into the role. When I was chief in Surrey, 1 month into the first COVID lockdown, 88-year-old Dennis Kelland was murdered in his own home. He lived alone in Godstone in Surrey. The team working on operations there very quickly identified and convicted his killer. A local man whose name I won't repeat, but was very familiar to me as a local constable many years before. When the trial concluded, Dennis's family wrote a thank you note to the team and to me, and it was one small detail in that I found most emotional. The crime scene had been in place at Dennis's home for quite some time. And during that time, colleagues had taken the trouble to water his houseplants, saying that they could see how much he loved them and that they wanted to look after them. That spoke volumes to Dennis's family about the police family and the care and compassion that we bring to our work. I'm not sure you can ever teach that, but we can share our stories about these things and let them become who we are. So I'm so grateful to my mate Andy, who shared his stories that brought me here today. I can get sentimental about policing, as you've probably gathered, about human frailty and about life, and I make no apologies for that. It's more than a vocation. This simple idea that I learned growing up in the community in the North East has definitely given me a sense of purpose in life. That is to do all I can through policing to create communities that are safe and feel safe too. And if you find work that you love, a vocation, a purpose, and I've also found it can carry you through the tougher times in life too, and we all have those. 10 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah at far too young an age to ovarian cancer. And tomorrow, I'll go back to Surrey to say farewell to my CID tutor, who got me started on my investigative journey, who now, sadly, is also beyond treatment for his cancer. And in typical policing fashion, he's booked a room in a pub to say farewell to all of his mates. What strength! People like Sarah and like Glenn shows that what true resilience is amongst all the noise and the distraction of the modern connected world. They allow us to focus on the simple things that can carry us through the best and worst of time. So here in Liverpool, in this place of learning, in the John Lennon building no less, a place rooted in music, I will conclude with a song lyric from Nature Boy. I think the best version is sung by Nat King Cole, if you want to have a listen. And that sings, the greatest thing that you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Now, you can learn many, many things in wonderful settings like this at Liverpool John Moores. But if you can learn to love your purpose in life, then anything is possible. Police and love. I'm sure you'll agree, 2 words that were made for each other. So with thanks to my mate Andy and in tribute to Sarah and to Glenn, thank you for welcoming me here this evening, for allowing me to share some stories and some ideas with you. I'm really enjoyed it. I hope you have on this warm Friday evening, and I'm very happy to take any questions on music, on football, or even on policing. Thank you.
Gavin, thank you very much.
My pleasure.